If you are an Ohio State football fan, I would really appreciate it if you answered a quick question from me. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 obviously being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how nervous are you for next Saturday's matchup against Notre Dame on September 23rd? It's exactly in 10 days. And I think, to my knowledge, it is a night game at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There are plenty of questions to answer in regards to Ohio State football, like there are with many teams around America. But in particular, because of scrutiny faced in the preseason and then some of the woes on offense backing up some what we would call preseason doubters, there is especially a microscopic view of Ohio State football right now and the problems that are presented within the program. And yes, the Notre Dame game is going to likely be a top 10 matchup unless Notre Dame blows their diaper against Central Michigan or Ohio State does the same against Western Kentucky, which I doubt will happen. It'll be a top 10 matchup at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But there are still plenty of questions to answer, and everyone is focusing on the questions that Ohio State has to answer. But there are questions for almost any program. In fact, I'd say every program factually has questions at this point in the season. For Texas, I know they went into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. The question is, can you just not choke for 1 year? Because it would be the most Texas thing to do in week 4 to go on the road and lose to Baylor. That would be, by definition, the most Texas thing to do after beating Alabama. And then for Penn State and Michigan in conference, there are questions as well. For Michigan, it's how does your run game perform against Big Ten competition when it has struggled in its initial 2 weeks against Group of 5 schools? For Penn State, how does the interior of the offensive line and defensive line function? And can Drew Aller continue his hot streak as a first-year starter against tougher defenses? And he, in theory, will face one that is tougher than at least West Virginia's and Delaware's against Illinois this week. And the preview video for that matchup, which is bigger than this one in my mind, will release tomorrow morning. So stay tuned for that. But to get back to Ohio State football, and I just wanted to talk about some other teams because I've mentioned in previous videos that there are some concerns for Ohio State, and I know that's a nationwide conversation being had as Ohio State's dropping in the polls, but everyone has questions. And Ohio State against Youngstown State, if you look at this from an optimistic point of view, answered many of the questions that were had about the program in a positive way. And whether you look at Ohio State in a negative or positive light, Kyle McCord being officially named the starting quarterback should result in a sigh of relief from every Ohio State fan. Against Youngstown State and also against Indiana, he looked like the most poised quarterback, certainly is the better leader. I don't think he's the better athlete, but he certainly has the better arm, more accurate, greater chemistry with the wide receivers, more confident, better footwork, doesn't make as many stupid decisions. Devin Brown making some scrambles and plays where he risked getting hit against Youngstown State. McCord's the guy. And McCord went from having a mediocre to above average or good performance against Indiana to looking like a standard Ohio State quarterback against Youngstown State. Albeit, there are still things he has to work on, but right now he looks like early 2021 CJ Stroud in my mind, which bodes well for him moving forward. If he can continue to improve game through game through game, he is going to be one of the nation's best quarterbacks by the end of the season, and that's very good. The wide receiver room, there's no drop-off in production there. While some thought that maybe could have been the case against Indiana, I just think that if you're a wide receiver, it's important that you have a quarterback who can deliver you the football. Obviously, McCord couldn't do that in week 1. Against Youngstown State in week 2, he certainly could do that. And then defensively, this team does have some moments where they give up runs, but they look like an elite pass defense. Their pass rush, I want to see more from it, more from JT Tuimoloau, but I think that he's looking like a more consistent player this year, consistently playing at a better level, and the upside for him, as we know, is certainly there. There are still some questions to be had, like Ohio State's run defense. They're going to be facing a Notre Dame team right now who's starting running back in Audric Estime is averaging, I think, close to 8 yards per carry. And with Joe Alt and others on that offensive line, that will be a real test for Ohio State's defense. But that question won't be able to be answered until the matchup in South Bend. Against Western Kentucky, there are some questions that can be answered, or at least some reassurance that's given to everyone paying attention to Ohio State football, which should be every fan of college football, because Ohio State, along with, in my mind, Michigan, Georgia, Washington, Florida State, Texas, much of the Pac-12, but also the top half of the SEC, the Big Ten, really every Power 5 conference deserves attention from the majority, if not all, of the college football fan base. Before we get any further into this video, please hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post more Ohio State football, Michigan football, Penn State, Big Ten football, and college football content in general. We are trying to grow this community to 20,000 subscribers, and I would really appreciate if you become a part of the best college football community on YouTube. Down in the comments section below, comment your thoughts on this game and answer my question from earlier if you haven't already. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you're an Ohio State fan especially, how nervous are you about the Notre Dame matchup? My answer to that would definitely be below a 5. And there are some reasons regarding that I think I'm going to do a special video on. I'll obviously include those reasons in my Ohio State Notre Dame preview and prediction next week, but perhaps before that, or maybe around the same time, I am going to release a video talking more specifically about Sam Hartman, some things about Notre Dame, but also about Ohio State. A hint is, look up Sam Hartman's numbers against defenses that are great, elite, especially aggressive defenses. It doesn't bode well for him or for Notre Dame. And the Fighting Irish, as good as they are, and the fact that, look, Marcus Freeman right now is a better head coach than I thought, especially Gerard Parker, their offensive coordinator. He's doing a better job than I anticipated. And Al Golden, he is cooking up a great college football defense. Notre Dame themselves has not faced an amazing test either. They've faced a bigger test than Ohio State will ever until they play in South Bend, and that was at NC State. But NC State, Brennan Armstrong right now looks closer to his 2022 than his 2021 self, despite being reunited with Robert Anae. And North Carolina State has questions at offensive line, running back, and really all-around offense in general. And their defense, they're less talented than Notre Dame's offense. That was a mismatch that went in Notre Dame's favor, although I was surprised that the Irish were able to beat the Wolfpack handily. Going back to Ohio State, though, I think that this defense will be able to do well against Notre Dame's offense, and I think that Ohio State's offense will have a test for Notre Dame's defense. Easily, it will be the best offense that the Fighting Irish face to date, and potentially, if Brian Hartline and Ryan Day and Kyle McCord, the running backs, the offensive line, and the wide receivers and tight end Cade Stover, if they can all click and get glued together and get chemistry, and they can formulate an identity, this could be the best offense that Notre Dame faces all season long. I know that this is a Western Kentucky preview, but really, when looking at Ohio State, they're 2-0. Western Kentucky's also 2-0, but Ohio State's number 2 in FPI. They're favored by 29 points last time I checked. Maybe it moved up or down, and Western Kentucky is only 73rd in FPI. Yep, the favorite is still Ohio State by 29 points. They're given a 97.1% chance to win, according to FPI. The Hilltoppers have scored 40 points or more in their 2 games so far this season. The game will be played in Ohio Stadium, the Horseshoe, and this is an area where if you're Ohio State, figure out what running backs work in what situations. Figure out who your running back number 1 is. I know Henderson is the biggest upside, And anyone who loves explosive plays, especially me, looks and sees, oh, like Henderson's awesome. Like, why wouldn't you start him? At least that's the initial reaction that sometimes I have. But then I remember that there's Chip Trayanum and Mayan Williams. These are bruising backs that you hit them, especially Trayanum. They fall forward for 1, 2, or 3 yards. They're not as flashy. They don't have the same high-end speed. They don't have the same value when they're in space, because Henderson's a home runner when he finds space and can juke out opponents. You saw this against Youngstown State. If you watched that game, he was healthy, clearly. Last year he suffered with an ankle and foot injury through the whole season and eventually had to sit out against Michigan and against Georgia, which may have cost the Buckeyes dearly, especially in that Georgia game when they struggled to run the football. But all things considered, Trayanum and Williams are great running backs. Williams was my pick to be Ohio State's best running back and starter entering the season. So far, I've gotten that wrong. However, against a defense like Notre Dame's, which right now looks very good, it could be a paper tiger. Same with any defense that Ohio State is scheduled to face. We don't know yet. We're only 2, or in the case of Notre Dame, USC, and a few other teams, 3 games into the season. But I feel like against these tougher defenses, Trayanum and Williams are going to reap more benefits and give you better dividends on the field than Henderson will. Henderson against these defenses, whether it's 21, 22, I'm not really going to count. He had a foot injury. That's unfortunate, not his fault. He has been a home run hitter, and then he's also been that same guy who gets stuffed at the line of scrimmage. It's the story of Nicholas Singleton, and then from my perspective as a Wolverine, it's the story of Donovan Edwards. These high-ceiling running backs who are great, numerous upside. They have the NFL build. However, with Michigan, you got Corum, and then in 21 you had Haskins, who would fall forward, old, reliable, very intelligent, knew how to use their bodies to juke out defenders, to accelerate and decelerate when appropriate and be patient. Just overall, despite not having the same physical athleticism or characteristics, they used other traits, especially their power. And you see this with Williams, and I think with Trayanum, you saw it last year and somewhat this year, even though he's gotten faster, to gain yards, to fall forward, and sometimes to compensate for an offensive line that just isn't having their best day. If your offensive line is playing perfectly and you're confident they're going to play at an A-, A+ level, then maybe going with Henderson or Edwards or Singleton is the wisest move. But if your offensive line isn't elite, or if they have an off day, or you're suffering from injuries, you can make your offensive line's job easier by bringing in a power back. I think, just a theory, if you're a Penn State fan, you can prove me wrong. I think that's why Katron Allen right now is getting more carries than Singleton and is the leader of the Nittany Lions in rushing yards. And that's something that I predicted he'd get more carries than Singleton for this season. Again, I had Singleton getting more yards and I think more touchdowns, though, just because he's the more explosive back and he's been used in the red zone more than Allen has. But Allen is this bruising back. He falls forward. He's patient. I mean, he's really admirable, and you gotta wonder, this would be bold and surprising but welcomed if it happened, if he turns out to be a better running back than Singleton this year. And Blake Corum, it looks like he's going to be better than Edwards, and maybe Trayanum or Williams takes that spot for Ohio State at some point this season. That's one question that I'm very curious to see, is how does this run game for Ohio State perform? They're facing a Western Kentucky defense that has allowed an average of 264.5 rushing yards per game. Western Kentucky has allowed more rushing yards per game than passing yards on defense. And Ohio State's passing offense is good when it clicks. However, test this Western Kentucky defense, find out who your most reliable running back is. I think that's a question that is underrated and I want to see answered. And then how does this secondary step up against Western Kentucky's quarterback room? Western Kentucky returns a quarterback in Austin Reed. Austin Reed is the returning leader in the FBS in passing yards career, I think. If not, no, not career, but in a single season in 2022. 2022's leader in passing yards. He had 4,744 passing yards, 40 passing touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and he had a 149.1 passer rating. I look at Austin Reed and the wide receivers and the scheme that Tyson Helton, Clay Helton's brother, by the way, runs with the Hilltoppers. And they are definitely going to throw a lot. They're going to be methodical with that air raid. They're going to test you, especially in the short and middle passing game. And I think that will be a good opportunity to see where's Ohio State's pass defense at. You know, are the ends going to be able to, get miraculous interceptions like they did against Penn State? And then all of us are thinking, well, if their defensive ends can defend the pass and their linebackers and defensive backs can too, this defense is going to be a problem for any team that wants to pass the ball. Or maybe their secondary is just better than last year, but nothing changes, which is still a welcomed improvement. Or perhaps maybe the defense really struggles and they allow anywhere from 250 to 300 to 350 total yards. More importantly than total yards, they allow more than 1 or 2 passing touchdowns. Yards can be empty, and as long as you don't allow points and you're clutch, in my mind, allowing a lot of passing yards, that can be just a symbol of you substituted in, you're too deep, and it was garbage time yards. I think that passing yards can be a very overrated statistic, but if you allow passing touchdowns and you let Western Kentucky, if you're Ohio State staff, be methodical in the passing game, that can tell us something that isn't good. Ohio State has the advantage everywhere from staff, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, the trenches, linebacker, defensive back, and I would say even special teams. The Buckeyes, I think, in the trenches, I think that outside of the running back room, that's their biggest question. How are you going to do rushing the passer? How are you going to do opening up holes in the run game, especially on the outside, protecting the passer, especially in these shorter downs, like 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3. I've noticed that Ohio State has struggled to run the football. And as much as Ryan Day with his personnel, and this is especially the case if Kyle McCord is comfortable and is a top 10 quarterback, who cares? We go 5 wide on 3rd and 3, and you'll likely get a first down. But it's good to have that option of running the football, because then maybe 4th and 1, you don't have to play action pass, or you don't have to go 5 wide on 4th and 1, which just looks asinine by definition. Just go under center, have a halfback, or maybe do what Ohio State did against Toledo, I think, with Mitch Rossi last year, and line up a tight end behind McCord and hand it off for a 1 or 2 yard gain on 4th down. Having that ability to run on 3rd and short, dare I say it, maybe 3rd and medium, like 3rd and 4 or 3rd and 5, to get yourself in that position to be in 4th and 1 or to pick up the first down straight up. That's very important. That will allow this offense to not be one-dimensional. That will allow this offense to keep defenses guessing constantly. And I think that Ohio State has the guard room, and they have Carson Hinsman, who right now is rated as the best center in the country according to Pro Football Focus. Look it up. That statistic even surprised me, even though I had Carson Hinsman as a second-team All-Big Ten starting center in the preseason. So I think the interior offensive line is great, but there are questions along both sides of the trenches, especially on the exterior for the offensive line. And in my mind, it's everywhere for the defensive line. We know that they have talent, but can they do better at getting to the quarterback? Can they achieve more tackles for loss? And they did do a serviceable job against Indiana and against Youngstown State. They did a good, serviceable, great job. Notre Dame's offensive line, however, is one of the better offensive lines in the country. If the Buckeyes can blow up that offensive line, then we will know that they're serious. At defensive back, another position I'm looking out for. Davison Igbinosun, Denzel Burke, Ronnie Hickman's gone, my bad. Lathan Ransom, obviously Jihad Carter, Cameron Martinez. These are players that, whether they're corners, safeties, nosebacks, nickelbacks, whatever position they are, how do they respond against this passing attack? Ohio State has faced Indiana and Youngstown State. None of those passing offenses compare to Austin Reed at Western Kentucky and his leading receiver, Easton Messer, who has 11 receptions, 134 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown as a wide receiver. And as a freshman, last year he had 1 reception for 44 yards and 1 touchdown. And right now, through 2 games, he leads the team in receiving yards and has 1 receiving touchdown. So I'm curious to see how Ohio State responds to this passing air raid assault by Western Kentucky and Tyson Helton. Austin Reed is my player to watch for the Hilltoppers. I think that is obvious, as he is their best player. He returns after having a phenomenal passing season last year, and Western Kentucky runs an air raid scheme, and they don't run it to perfection, but they're efficient with it. And there's a reason that Bailey Zappi broke the record in the NCAA for passing yards in a single season and also passing touchdowns. He set NCAA records with those numbers in the 2021 season, and then he was drafted by the New England Patriots and actually started a few games for them. So Tyson Helton has a reputation with quarterbacks. I expect Austin Reed this year to be better than he was last year. However, he's obviously facing a defense that far outclasses his offense. So I'll be curious to see if he has a serviceable game. I doubt he has a great game. There is a chance with that air raid scheme and how much they pass, he could just get blown up, throw no touchdowns, 2 picks or 3 picks, a forced fumble, etc. There's a chance also that happens. For Ohio State, I'm looking at Chip Trayanum. I know that Travion Henderson at this very moment, I think, is the starting running back for Ohio State, and I think until proven otherwise, or until the staff realizes that there is someone better, and by realize I mean in-game circumstance, Henderson is not giving them as good of a chance to win as Trayanum or Williams is. I think that he will be the default running back number 1. But Trayanum has had a fair collection of performances against the Hoosiers and also Youngstown State. Right now, I would say he is the most versatile running back between Henderson and Williams. I think that in a certain way, he's actually a hybrid between the two of them. Right now, he is second in the team in carries and second in rushing yards. He has 14 carries, 77 rushing yards, 5.5 yards per carry. I rewatched some film on the Indiana game because it was showcased, and Chip Trayanum set up both of Mayan Williams' touchdown runs, from what I remember. And he was able to bounce to the outside, quickly regain his footing, pick up a few first downs. He's a smart player from Akron, Ohio. I know that doesn't have to do really with anything, but 5'11", 233, big, jacked, healthy, athletic, in my mind, smart, obviously worked on his game in the preseason. Being able to bounce to the outside and have the agility that he does and know when to do that versus when to just hunker down, hold the football tight, and run through. He's a great running back. Ohio State, I kid you not, all of their running backs potentially have NFL futures. I think that Trayanum, Williams, and especially Henderson, because of his frame and build, have futures in the NFL. Now, whether that's, a Hall of Famer or Pro Bowler or not, or someone who isn't those but still helps their team win a Super Bowl or reach the playoffs or help rebuild, that's a different story that we're not going to talk about because this is not an NFL channel. This is college football with Sam. But I'm very fascinated to see what Trayanum does. You could fill in Travion Henderson here, although I think he had a few good plays. Really, every time he touched the ball against Youngstown State, he had a good play. And Williams, we've seen pick up 2 rushing touchdowns against Indiana, where he was the player of the game in my mind against the Hoosiers. He helped Ohio State pull away on a day where they just struggled mightily on offense. So Austin Reed for Western Kentucky and Chip Trayanum for the Ohio State Buckeyes. My prediction for this game is Ohio State 49, Western Kentucky 10. The Hilltoppers will throw for over 200 yards. However, most of those yards will lead to either a field goal, turnovers, or punts. Maybe Western Kentucky gets on average a first down per drive, but as the field shrinks as they get closer to the 50-yard line, Ohio State's defense is able to be more aggressive, bow up, and force punts, or turnovers, or turnovers on downs, or just straight up forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, interceptions. They're outmatched, and they will be outcoached on Saturday. There's no doubt about that. Ryan Day and his staff have been taking heat, understandably so. They have faced unrelenting, almost unbearable criticism, in my mind, since the end of 2022. And in regards to the Michigan game, it's understandable. I think people have to put things in perspective with that Peach Bowl loss. They have to. Ohio State, even though Georgia was definitely the better team last year, because of schematic advantages and the fact that Ohio State had the wide receivers to torch Georgia's defensive backs every time they matched up, Ohio State would win that game, I think, 6, 7, or 8 out of 10 times on a neutral field against Georgia. And they were dominating that game. And Ryan Day, there were several moments where he nearly caught Georgia off guard. There were moments where his players, there were 2 dropped interceptions by Ohio State's defense against Stetson Bennett, and there was a fake punt being set up, and if Kirby Smart doesn't call that timeout, Ohio State converts that first down and runs the clock in all likelihood. Ryan Day's a good football coach. He was able to nearly outcoach, in my mind, head coach to head coach, he outcoached Kirby Smart in that Peach Bowl. Kirby Smart just had better players and had better assistants surrounding him, most notably Todd Monken. Ryan Day was juggling play calling and also being a CEO, and only lost to a 15-0 national title team by 1. I think he has a great staff. I think that Hartline, this is another game where I mentioned the same thing against Youngstown State. Let Hartline take the reins, even if it means you look lackluster again. Ryan Day, we all know that you can call good plays. We know this. And I think that against a weak Western Kentucky defense, the Buckeyes will rush for over 200 yards, and they will break off their longest rush of the year. Wouldn't be surprised if they get a rushing touchdown of 50 or 60 yards or more, just given the speed and space that Henderson has, and also Trayanum and Williams having breakout speed as well. Also, Dallin Hayden and Evan Pryor, I think that there's a chance they see the field in this game. I think Ohio State, much like I said in my Michigan video previewing their game against Bowling Green, I think that this week, and if not this week, sooner rather than later, their teams are eventually going to start hanging points rather quickly. The offenses will, in Michigan's case, I think they've been one of the more efficient offenses in the country. It's a different thing compared to Ohio State. I just think Michigan is bored. At some point, they're going to turn it up to another level. And for Ohio State, I think they have too good of a staff and too good talent to be this inefficient for much longer. I think at some point they'll click, and Ohio State will be carpet bombing most defenses that they face. So 49-10, Ohio State covers, and then they will have a week to prepare for Notre Dame in a game that right now, to go back to my quick question I asked of you earlier, I'm confident that Ohio State is going to play well in that game and win, but we're going to see how Ohio State does against Western Kentucky and how Notre Dame does against Central Michigan, of course. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to subscribe and like this video if you haven't already. And also check out my Patreon community if you have yet to do so. I do weekly picks against the spread and also against the money line on my Patreon channel, depending on what tier you join. No matter what tier you join, though, your name will be featured at the end of the video, and I will thank you personally like I am about to do now. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst for being my All-American patron, and I also thank Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale for being all conference tier patrons. I'm looking to add more content to Patreon, Please pay attention to my community posts, as I'll be asking some questions on that page in regards to what content would get more of you to at least consider joining my Patreon channel. Have a great day, guys, and let's have a phenomenal week 3 of college football. I'm so excited, and I'm hoping for the best for the Big Ten, and also some chaos to make things fun. Have a great night.